And welcome to Advantage Radio Ministries and welcome to Second Chances here at Lift FM. My name is Greg Hennis, and this is our weekly program where we are privileged and honored to bring on so many wonderful people from all different walks of life, some with some stories to share of personal experiences, some to talk about work that the Lord has laid on their heart. Some are musicians, some are just pastors, some are just ordinary people. But no matter what our guests are on this program, they all have one common denominator, and that is that they love Jesus and they want to serve him. And we are privileged to have such wonderful people each and every week here on Second Chances. No exception today. Our author that we're going to be visiting with is Jeanne Nigro. She is the author of the book entitled Unshaken, Standing Strong in Uncertain Times. And Jeanne, first of all, thank you so much for joining us here on Second Chances.
Oh, you're welcome, Greg. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
And, you know, as you talk to people every day, you just find out how uncertain we all are about life and where things are heading. We obviously know because we serve the Lord that the end times are going to be very troubled and very difficult times, and very much looking forward to discussing your book with you today. So thank you for joining us. We love to start off, Jeanne, with all of our guests. We love to learn a little bit about them, you know, who they are, where they're from, and perhaps how you began your walk with the Lord.
Okay. Well, I actually grew up in Northeast Ohio and the youngest of seven, and lived there until I was about 24 and moved to California. But I was raised Catholic, but by the time I was in my 20s, I didn't believe in God at all. I really, Greg, I grew up with a lot of messages for just various reasons, messages, lies that I believed about myself, that I was bad and inadequate and worthless. And those messages really ended up controlling my life quite a bit. And so by the time I was in high school, I learned that something that if I would drink, that I would find it would make it easier to express myself, and I didn't feel so worthless and that type of thing. So I became quite a heavy drinker when I was about 16, and then all through college. And by the time I graduated from college, I really didn't believe in God anymore, and was more of I guess I would say, New Age beliefs. Thought that God was just a energy force and another word for truth, and that the Bible was for ignorant people, and all those kinds of things. Like I was more enlightened, and so actually I moved out to California after grad school, and I was 24, looking for truth, thinking that it was out there, that people were more enlightened out there, and searching for truth and my purpose in life, and answers to all those questions, and also for healing, I think, of the worthlessness that I always felt. So moved out there and really struggled, on my own, and just drank more, and tried to find love by going to bars and picking up men, and just trying to fill those holes of feeling very worthless and unlovable, and trying to get those needs met, by basically listening to the messages of the world. What the world, I used to read Cosmopolitan magazine, like, okay, I'm an adult now, I'm 24, this must be what I'm supposed to do. The problem is the messages of the world, don't always tell you the consequences of following the messages. So ended up with just numerous physical problems, emotional issues, went through therapy, but understood all the issues, but never really experienced healing. And just really, by the time I was 28, got to a point where I was so hopeless, couldn't find a man that loved me, just experienced rejection, and couldn't find a job. I changed jobs a lot, trying to find that job that I was created for, that I believed in, and could never really experience healing of the deep worthlessness. So when I was 28, I wanted to kill myself. I got to a point, I was in my apartment in Seal Beach, California, and wanted to kill myself because I just could not take the pain of the hopelessness and the loneliness and the worthlessness anymore. I tried everything. There's nothing left to try. So, but thankfully, about 6 months prior to that, I had started a job where I met another Christian, and usually I would never even talk to a Christian. I didn't want to go near one. And but he was different and not judgmental, and asked me a lot of questions, but just was such a good friend. And so he had started getting me finally after about 6 months to listen to Christian radio and a little bit, and I was kind of listening and kind of trying to figure out how they could possibly have psychological principles in the Bible, because I thought the Bible was just ignorant stories. So, there was these seeds planted. I went to church with he and his family on Christmas Eve, and so just little seeds. So when I got to that place, this was March of 1989, where I wanted to kill myself, I cried out to God, and I said, if you're real, take control of my life, because I don't want it anymore. And he did, and his spirit came upon me, and he took control of my life, and that was 27 years ago. And everything I have now, I mean, he truly, Psalm 103, redeemed my life from the pit, because I would definitely be dead, if not from killing myself, from being drunk in a ditch somewhere, or beat up, or killed, or something. So he redeemed my life from the pit and crowned me with love and compassion. Everything I have now, my ministry and my heart to help people to grow in intimacy with him, especially during these times, and to just experience who God is and how he sees them, drives me. It's my passion, and it's because of I would have absolutely nothing, not even my life, if it wasn't for God and everything that he's given me in terms of his I'm a family now and a ministry, but most importantly that he's given me himself, that relationship that I always wanted and that I always searched for, and that purpose and that healing of my heart that I had always been searching for. So he desires to heal our hearts, and he certainly does. So my passion is really helping people to experience the same thing that I did, and even after they were Christian, obviously to experience more and more of that intimacy with him, and to expose the lies that, even as a believer, we believe lies about ourselves and about God, and so helping people to get past those and to experience his love and freedom.
We are visiting with Jeanne Nigro, the author of the book entitled Unshaken, Standing Strong in Uncertain Times. Jeanne, you mentioned your ministry, Jeanne Nigro Ministries. Tell us a little bit about what that entails and what the purpose of that ministry is all about.
Okay. Well, it's basically, teaching. I speak a lot at different conferences and retreats and so forth. I'm an author, written the Unshaken, Standing Strong. I have a television program called Facets of the Stone. And the primary purpose, as I said, is to really, especially how God's crafted it recently, is to empower people to stand strong in these uncertain times through intimacy with God. So I teach, and I have a heart for three areas that sometimes are typically not integrated, but the Lord's given me this ability to integrate these areas of healing strongholds of the heart, healing the heart, and Jewish roots, and also end time theology. So I bring those three areas together in a way that they're very practical, because I see them all linked together. They're really facets of God's heart, his desire to heal our heart, the fact that he's Jewish and all that he's going to do when he comes back, and Israel and so forth, and the feasts, and how we'll be celebrating them with him, and then the end times theology and how we need that intimacy and that healing in our hearts in order to stand strong through these end times. So those are the core themes of my teachings and my CDs and my TV show and books and so forth.
So the book we're going to talk about today, Unshaken, Standing Strong in Uncertain Times. First of all, Jeanne, is this the first book that you've had published?
Yes, it is. It's published by Destiny Image, yes.
So tell us how this book and getting it published, there's always interesting stories with bringing people on and asking them how they got their first work together, how it came to be, and then how it got published. So could you share a little bit of that with us?
Sure, and I have wanted to write a book for a long time. Before I was even a believer, I had that desire to write a book, and this really came from, Greg, the experience of another testimony, but my own experience of fear of the end times. I had met with some people who supposedly had this insider intelligence of what was going to happen. This is a few years back to the country, and after hearing all these horror stories, I really went into fear. I was really paralyzed by fear. And I thought, why even go on teaching? What's it going to matter? This is all inevitable. This is all going to happen. And why send my daughter to school? Why do anything when just stay home and hide out until Jesus comes back? And from that, obviously, I teach on fear and freedom from fear. So I knew something was wrong, that I was paralyzed by fear. So I started asking God, okay, show me what lie, because behind fear and stress, there's always a lie we're believing about Him or about ourselves. So I said, Lord, what lie am I believing that I'm so paralyzed by fear? And as He began to reveal these things to me, and then what His truth was, and started really showing me more about intimacy with Him, and then how to, because I had always thought, well, maybe my first book would be on the feast, because I teach quite a bit on the biblical feast and teach Passover Seders and so forth. And so He showed me, and I also have a passion for the millennium. So I've always loved studying the millennium and the millennial temple. So He just, as I started, I think originally it was mostly about fear and overcoming fear, but then as I started writing it, I felt He leading me to integrate the biblical feast part and the millennium part, and then He really started showing me how those were all facets of His heart. And as we connect with all of the facets of His heart, not just one, that we grow in intimacy with Him. And so I think I just when I moved to Dallas, we moved here from Southern California about 3 years ago, and started going to things like Christian writers workshops and talking to different publishers and other people who had published books, and then just went through this process of writing proposals for the publishers, and then worked out an agreement with Destiny Image.
So tell us a little bit about what the overall theme of the book, Unshaken, Standing Strong in Uncertain Times. Give us a little overview of this book, and as you do, maybe you could share a little bit with us about what the hope was to accomplish by putting this out.
Sure, and as I said, when I first started writing it, I had no idea that this is going to be what it was going to be called even. I thought it was going to be something about fear, and had no idea it would be released right before an election, as we are in today. So it's definitely God's time and His message for this book. And the bottom line is really that God is not calling us to fear or be angry or frustrated, or to just give up and wait till Jesus comes back. I think those are some of the common responses to what's going on now. And but yet He has us here for a specific purpose at this time, to partner with Him to release His purposes for this time. And so, but we won't be able to stand strong unless we know what our purpose is in life, which is really to experience intimacy with Him. And we won't be able to stand strong in persecution without having that intimacy. The bottom line is that it's not going to cut it anymore just to have this head knowledge of God, or to be a believer just because it's a social thing. We really are going to have this intimate relationship with God, where we are aligning what we think and what we feel and what we do and our attitudes with His heart, how He thinks, how He feels. So a lot of the book is really connecting and aligning with what is His heart. What's His heart toward you? Do you beat yourself up all day and you're down on yourself, and that those aren't God's thoughts toward you? Or are you critical of other people? Those aren't God's thoughts toward other people. So what is His heart toward yourself, toward other people? What's His heart toward Israel, toward the feast, toward the millennium? And as we, again, connect with what His passions are, we grow in intimacy with Him. And that intimacy is really that number one anchor that we all need, because it's the only thing that can't change. There's so much changing in our world every day. We don't have to watch the news for more than a minute. But the only thing that can't change is who God is and how He sees you. And so really growing in the ability to have that focus, so that we're not shaken, so that we don't look just like everyone else, fearful and stressed and angry. We need to be lights at this time. So that's the essence of the book.
We're visiting with Jeanne Nigro, the book Unshaken, Standing Strong in Uncertain Times. And Jeanne, before we continue the interview, if someone is listening to this program, would like to learn more about the book, perhaps about your ministry, or your TV program, or anything else that we discuss here today, is there a website that one could visit?
Absolutely, Greg. And the website is JeanneNigro.com. So that's spelled JeanneNigro.com. And on there you can find out more about the book. You can purchase the book. It's really the easiest place to do that, and we'll get it to you really quickly. And there's also all of the episodes of this season. Actually, today the 13th show just aired, and so they're all on the website. You can watch them this season. We did the feast and the millennium, so and blogs and many CD series that are on there. So there's lots of resources to help you to stand strong.
What would you say, Jeanne, makes Unshaken different from other books that, say, address end times or the last days? What do you think makes it different?
I think that it's not head knowledge of the end times, that sometimes can scare us. It's really very practical. So it's like, okay, what is, say that what we know about the millennium or the end times, what does that say about who God is? What does that say about how he sees you? And then how does that make a difference in your life, for healing these lies that you might believe about yourself or about God? Because those lies are really at the root of our fear and our stress and our frustration and so forth and unforgiveness. So it takes it to a very practical place. So what does it say about who God is? What does it say about how he sees me? And how do I apply that in my moment-by-moment life? Because it's in the moment-by-moment that we either grow in intimacy with God or we give the enemy more reign in our lives. So it's recognizing that, hey, every moment counts in the spiritual battle. We're either growing in intimacy or we're giving the enemy a handle. And in the last chapter, I call it the action plan. And again, I take 10, I call facets of God's heart for the millennium, or 10 plans that he has for the millennium. And how do we align ourselves with that each day? Like, what can we do each day to align ourselves with where God's going, things that we can do to make a difference that will continue on into the millennium? Because I think a lot of times people feel like, oh, it's just so far gone. This world is so off track that there's just nothing I can do to make a difference. And so these are really practical, and it's not, run for office. It's things like, if I'm going to be ruling and reigning with Jesus over nations, what can I do to help me to rule and reign over my own thoughts and emotions? And if we're going to be celebrating the feast with Jesus in the millennium, what can I do now to learn about the feast? Or what do the feasts tell me about intimacy with God? So it's all very practical, and it's all very geared toward intimacy with God, which I think is something that's quite unique about an end times focus.
As you just mentioned, intimacy with God is very much a key factor in our ability to stand amidst uncertainty. Why do you think that that is so important as we face all these things that we see before us day in and day out?
Well, for example, I think it's in the second chapter when I talk about intimacy with God. I share that one, it's our purpose in life. It's to know him, to experience intimacy with him. He died, Jesus died for us, not that we could work for him, but that we have intimate relationship with him. It's the only thing that can't change, like I said, when everything else is changing. And I also add the point that intimacy with God is what will keep us from deception. And I believe that, I know, the Bible tells me, but I can see it, in these end times, that there's just a tidal wave of deception, not just upon the world, but upon the church. And so, again, if we only connect with one facet of his heart, for example, that he's love, well, we're going to be deceived. And we need to connect with all of the facets of his heart. It was, like I said, his heart toward Israel, the temple, the millennium, his holiness, his righteousness, all these different aspects of him will keep us from deception. And then also it's what we need to stand strong in persecution. I mean, we know that it's going to get more difficult to be a believer, and there's going to be persecution increasing. And if we don't have that intimacy with him where he fills those holes in our heart where we need to get others' approval, or we have fear of rejection or fear of what other people think of us, how are we going to stand strong? So when we experience intimacy with him, then we realize, he's the only one that can love us perfectly, and that he's filling all those holes that we often look to other people to fill. And so those are ways that having that intimacy will help us to stand strong. And every day I have to ask myself throughout the day, what's determining my mood right now? Is it this person who said something to me? Is it, because I'm stressed out? because there's so much to get done, or is it how God sees me and who he is? And, when we are letting someone else control us or some other situation control how we feel, we don't look any different from anyone else. And so, again, it's that realizing that, okay, if we want revival, if we want to be lights in this world, we're going to have to it's got to start with our own intimate relationship with God.
You use the term in the book intimacy blockers, and tell us, what do you mean by that, and how do we defend against them?
Well, I think that there are many intimacy blockers, and I think that many of us are not aware of what does block intimacy, and we feel like, it's just a normal part of life. So, for example, fear and stress is huge intimacy blockers, and especially stress. We think, well, that's not a sin, or that's everybody's stressed. It's just the way of life in 2016. And but really, fear or stress is just a socially acceptable word for fear. Again, rooted in it is lies that we believe, that we're on our own, that we're all alone, that God's not in the picture. We oftentimes put someone else's face on God, that maybe he's not always there, or he's disappointed in us when we're not perfect, or that we have to kind of hide from him, he's mad at us. So fear and stress are intimacy blockers. Being critical about, it's impossible to really experience intimacy when we don't have God's heart toward ourselves and toward others. So when we're down on ourselves and feeling shame or beating ourselves up, I'm a bad wife or husband or child or whatever it is, sister, brother, God's not, those words aren't from God. Those are from the enemies, the accuser. So being critical of others, not forgiving, being in this anger and frustration mode, feeling that we have to perform in order to get God's acceptance or love or to have worth. So there's all these intimacy blockers that the bottom line, they're all based on lies. And so as we ask God, he's so faithful to show us what is in our hearts. He desires to reveal truth in our inmost parts. So when we ask him, Lord, what am I believing? What lie am I believing that I'm feeling fearful or stressed? And he reveals that to us. And we have to confess it as sin, because whatever is not of faith is sin. And that's where I believe we have to recognize that it's a spiritual battle, because when we hold on to these things like fear and stress and unforgiveness, we give the enemy ground in our lives. We give him authority that isn't his. We give him more ground. And so it's a spiritual battle. And so by confessing, that's a spiritual weapon of warfare to me that I use props a lot when I teach, that sometimes when, for example, if we fear and stress, there's like a rope to the enemy. We're giving him a handle in our life. And so when we confess, it is sin. It cuts that rope. And when we forgive, it cuts that rope. And we recognize that God has not given me a spirit of fear. So in the name of Jesus, I bind the spirit of fear and command it to go. And I cancel any authority I've given the enemy by believing these lies. And I'll say out loud or under my breath if I can't say it out loud. I just confess that I've been believing that you're disappointed in me because I'm not perfect, that you don't see me the same way. And I just cancel Satan's authority I've given him, for I believe in this lie, and I come out of agreement with it in Jesus' name. And then that cuts that rope. And then we can say, Lord, show me your truth about this. Because then we can hear from God when we've cut that rope. And so I give lots of examples in the book how God just loves to speak to your heart. He might bring a scripture. He might just speak a word that he knows will bring healing to your heart and bring truth to your heart, so that we are thinking and feeling and reacting out of truth and not out of lies.
Tell us, if you could, and indicate actually, that a proper focus now on millennium is important to our ability to stand strong in the future. Explain to us why that is.
Well, Greg, we have to have an idea of where we're going. That gives us, obviously, hope for the future. We've got to recognize that, and I love God's just giving me a passion to study and teach on the millennium, because I think it's just something that's never taught very often, so we don't even realize where we're going. And to think, when Jesus comes back, who's he going to be? What's going to be on his mind and heart? And what's his plans? And what are we going to be doing with him? We talk about bridegroom, but we have no idea what that really means. And so I get into that in the book. But it gives us a focus. Like, okay, this is where I'm going, and this is what I'm going to be doing with Jesus, and this is going to be what what he's going to be like and what his plan is. So that focus, it gives us one hope for the future, because we realize that, well, it's never going to be perfect here, and so being angry that it's not perfect is not going to help. It's only going to be perfect in the millennium when righteousness reigns in every government, every country. And but then, to me, even more importantly, or as important, is that it gives us direction for now. As I mentioned, when we know where we're going, then we can, that action plan, in a sense, it gives us steps or actions that we can take now that are going to make a difference in the millennium, or that will prepare us spiritually for Jesus' return. And so it gets our eyes off of everything that we don't have in this world, or that's wrong with this world, and gets us focused on where we're going, and gives us an action plan and a direction. If his heart, one of the things he's going to do is heal and restore everything on the earth. Well, what can I do now to bring restoration in relationships where I'm avoiding someone or haven't forgiven someone? So we can take it to a very, very practical, personal, moment by moment part of our lives. And in doing that, it's like, there is a lot that we can do. We're not victims. We're not hopeless or helpless. There is a lot we can do that will make a difference now and in the millennium, and that will prepare us for Jesus' return.
Well, obviously, there's a lot of people out there, Jeanne, that are suffering with fear, anxiety, uncertain times. Some of those people may not know Jesus. So if you don't know Jesus, it even makes things worse, because there is no hope. But as you and I both know, with Jesus, there is hope. So, Jeanne, before we run out of time together, we'd love to see if you'd be willing to pray with listeners that are feeling that crush of the uncertain times, the fear, and just help them to feel some peace, and the Lord loves them. And we'd like to see if you would be willing to lead us in that prayer.
Absolutely. Lord God, we just thank you so much for who you are, and we thank you that you have not given us a spirit of fear, but power and love and a sound mind. And we thank you that you will never leave us or forsake us, and that you are with us, and that you're using all things in our lives for good. So, Lord, I ask that you would just show us, when we do fear and stress, what lie we're believing about you or about ourselves, and help us to confess that to you and just speak to our hearts, Lord. Reveal to us these lies so that we can know your truth and experience your love, God. You desire intimacy with us more than we could ever even desire it with you. So, Lord, I thank you that your heart is to heal our hearts. I thank you that it's not your will for us to be fearful and stressed. So, Lord, I pray that you would just pour out your spirit upon our listeners now, and just reveal yourself to them, that you're with them, and that fear is not from you. No matter how justified they might feel, that it's not from you, and that you are always using everything for good, and you care about every detail of their lives, and you want to meet every need of their lives. So we thank you and we praise you for who you are, and we pray that we would all grow closer in intimacy with you today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Our guest on Second Chances today is Jeanne Nigro. She's the author of Unshaken, Standing Strong in Uncertain Times. And once again, Jeanne, before we say goodbye, someone's listening to this program today, would like to learn more about your ministry, about your work, your book, television program. What's the website they could visit?
The website is JeanneNigro.com. It's JeanneNigro, and you'll find everything you need to know about the book and TV show and lots of other resources.
Well, we want to thank you so much for joining us today on Second Chances. It has been a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me, Greg.
Tune in next week for more Second Chances right here from Advantage Radio Ministries here on Lift FM.